This week's episode brought to you by Josh Smith's three-pointer. Every time you need it, it's there, except for all those times it's not. Welcome, everybody, to another Boxscore Geeks show. I won't lie, I'm a little despondent this week. What with the fall of the Clippers, and you can rest assured we'll be talking about that. I'm your host, Andres Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my wonderful producer, Brian Foster. Brian, something I've been trying to do is think up cool adjectives and just rattle them off, and you can see how much I just dropped the ball this week. But anyway, Brian, give a shout out so that everybody knows your lovely voice and face if you're recording yourself this week.
Yeah, we're both up on the stream right now. Patrick, he may join us a little bit later, so we'll see. But for now, it's just the two of us. And yeah, it's good that you're thinking of some new adjectives. I want to stay away from all those God and Jesus-like ones. I don't want to be like the Beatles, and fall into that trap. So I appreciate
what you're
the new
telling
adjectives.
me is to start finding more theist-related adjectives to use about you. I'm going to do that. We got holy. I got this is awesome. You're going to see what I do next week with this, Brian.
Oh, okay, good. I'm looking forward to it. And I'm sad about the Clippers too, but just think, you could be Bill Simmons. His Clippers lost, and he got fired by ESPN. So poor Bill Simmons.
How are they his Clippers? I thought he was the Celtics.
Oh no, Clippers are his adopted team.
I get very weird. I get into weird arguments about this as a sports fan because I'm a very fair weather fan, and then I follow teams for weird reasons. And then people get all upset with you about that crap. And to me, it's very annoying because I think the rules about who you're allowed to root for and yeah, whatever. Okay, so obviously this week's show, nothing too surprising. We're going to be running down the last round of the playoffs. We had a bunch of potential Game 7s. Only one actually went to Game 7 and did not go the way I think anybody anticipated. So we'll be talking that. I want to talk a little bit about Michael Jordan versus LeBron James, the trope that won't die, and in this case, in a stupid way. And then we're actually going to wrap up talking a little bit about some behind-the-scenes stuff on the site. Sound good, Brian?
Oh, I can get on board with that plan, Dre.
Oh my! We're supposed to be hyping up the audience, and the own producer, I had this earlier when I was talking about those little things I do at the beginning when I whisper "brought to you by," which I mucked up with Josh Smith this week, by the way. But I was like, what do you think, Brian? And you're like, it's okay. So, I think it's a Mike Birbiglia quote I'm going to steal. You're like an entourage member, but you're not like the good entourage member. You're like the apathetic one. So,
well, here's the way I look at it. You can't have everything be, 100 out of 100 or a 0 out of 100. Sometimes there's a middle ground.
I guess, although this is, if you recall, when Magic Johnson entered the league, they told him, they were like, you're too enthusiastic. You're not going to be able to last like this. And he had one of the best careers ever. So, you know what? I say Magic Johnson it up, put the dial to 11 100% of the time.
There we go. Right, that's what I like to hear.
Let's talk the Clippers versus the Rockets. And to be candid, I would normally not care how this went down. I actually really did want the Clippers to advance. I mean, obviously, the Clippers already took down the Spurs, and I wanted Chris Paul to kind of get his, and they have the best tandem in the league, between DeAndre Jordan and Chris Paul. And obviously Blake Griffin was playing Larry Bird in the playoffs. So there was a lot going for him, and they unraveled and fell apart. And, it's not really that surprising. The reality about this team was, outside of Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, and Chris Paul, this team is horrendous. We were talking a little bit about Doc Rivers and what happens next. And I went to Basketball Insiders. I think I included the link. If not, you can find it. But Basketball Insiders has the salary. And, they've got Blake Griffin and Chris Paul wrapped up for 4 years. They've got most of the hard work done. DeAndre Jordan's contract expires after the season, but the nice part with bird rights being in a huge market, being the Clippers, they should have no problem re-signing DeAndre Jordan, even if it puts them over the cap, which I believe it will. Now, outside of that, they've got Josh Reddick and Spencer Hawes on contract to make a combined around $13 million a year for the next 2 seasons. And then Spencer Hawes, I believe it has a player option in his 3rd year. So picking up Spencer Hawes, oh my goodness. Outside of that, they don't have anything too horrible, which is the good news. They've got 5 players basically on long contracts: Paul, Blake Griffin, Spencer Hawes, and JJ Redick. I'm including DeAndre Jordan. If the Clippers do not retain DeAndre Jordan, and another team I've brought up before is Jimmy Butler. If the Bulls don't retain Jimmy Butler and the Clippers don't retain DeAndre Jordan or some mix and match, you were allowed to mock either of those teams forever because there is no excuse not to just give them the money and keep them. I was making fun of OKC fans a little this week, obviously, because James Harden just made it back to the Western Conference Finals before Kevin Durant. So hilarious. Or actually, Kevin Durant did last. Never mind. Sorry, I completely messed that up. Anyway, James Harden is doing better than Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook are right now. And to all the haters that said, oh, he was a complimentary player that needed those guys, clearly we can see how wrong that was. But, I went over this in the past, and essentially James Harden was let go over essentially a dispute of about $4 million a year, which whenever you have an elite superstar level player, a dispute of $4 million a year is hilarious because again, Spencer Hawes is getting more than $4 million a year as a complimentary player. So if you don't think a superstar is worth that extra $4 million, I know that a lot of these owners, these GMs like to save face, like to appear strong in negotiations, don't want to appear weak. This is a case where you can lose the negotiations and laugh all the way to the bank. It's like when the Bulls played, I think it was 23 million or 30 million. Michael Jordan got a bunch of money for, I think, his second year back with the Bulls after he'd retired the first time. You laugh all the way to the bank if you've got Michael Jordan because you can't pay him enough with his exposure, with how good he was. You laugh all the way to the bank. Same thing here. DeAndre Jordan better be in a Clippers uniform next year. But what makes me sad about this series is Josh Smith. I hate Josh Smith. He's been a bad player. We panned this move when it happened. So essentially, Robbie O'Malley commented on Facebook to me earlier today. He said there was nothing wrong with Josh Smith because Josh Smith was just a min price pickup. To explain what happened for those of you that don't recall, when Josh Smith was paid by the Pistons to go away, I'm actually watching the live stream, Brian. This is very intoxicating to watch James Harden. But anyway, so he's really good. But okay, so when Josh Smith was released by the Pistons, they just paid him to go away. This was a full out amnesty, essentially. They said, you're still on contract. We could just keep you for this year, but you know what? We're just going to pay you to go away. The Houston Rockets decided to amnesty Tariq Black. I hope I said that right. If not, I apologize. Who was picked up by the Lakers and is playing quite well for them. I think I have a comparison for you, Brian, if that makes the background less Giphy, or Jiffy, sorry. So anyway, he was paid to go away, so they got rid of Tariq Black to make money to sign Josh Smith. So essentially what they did is they traded Tariq Black for Josh Smith. If you compare the two for the season, Tariq Black is really young, really cheap, plays a big position, center, and played it quite well. Close to star level, points over par of 2.7 points, which basically means if he plays the full game, all else being equal, he gives you an edge of 3 points. Bettors can understand the goodness of this. Josh Smith for the year was negative. Now, to be fair, that includes his time on Detroit, where he was horrible. He actually was slightly above average for the Rockets. I can't take away too much from that, except to say they basically took a really big gamble on Josh Smith for their team. He played a little above average at a position they didn't really need what he did. To be fair, he didn't shoot well. He was bad at shooting. The two things he did well were he passed the ball decently, except if you look at his assist to turnover ratio, Josh Smith passes the ball 5.8 times per 48 minutes, an average power forward only 3.2, but Josh Smith's turnovers are 5.3 turnovers per 48 minutes compared to an average power forward's at 2.5. It's basically a wash. He passes better than a power forward, but he turns the ball over a ton, so it kind of comes out in the wash. So this was a horrible pickup. And if you look at the playoffs, Josh Smith was actually quite bad almost all the way up until those last 3 games. And in those last 3 games where they beat up the Clippers and, upset them, Josh Smith actually had 2 really good games. Brian, I can't believe you sent this to me because it was only for 1 game. But basically someone said Josh Smith is out 3-point shooting Kyle Korver, which was true in the very last game. In the very last 2 games against the Clippers, Josh Smith went 6 for 11 from 3. But to put that in perspective, for the series before then, here was Josh Smith's 3-point shooting against the Clippers. He went in the very, very first game where he went 3 for 12. He went 1 for 5 from 3. In the next game, 0 for 1. Next game, 0 for 3. Fourth game, 0 for 0. In that game, they got blown out by 33 points. So then in the last 3 games, he goes 1 for 3, 4 for 7, 2 for 4. So he plays well in these last 3 games. The Clippers get upset. The Rockets go on. And I have to hear people online say, see the Josh Smith trade paid off because that fourth quarter against the Clippers where, they they collapsed and fell apart and gave up, I think, a 19-point lead. Josh Smith really carried them, and this is what they got him for. And the answer is, if Chris Paul doesn't miss that game, I think game 3 or game 4, if he doesn't miss that game that the Clippers lose by 6, if Doc Rivers gets anybody other than Austin Rivers, Spencer Hawes, JJ Redick, Jamal Crawford to surround that core, we never talk about the Josh Smith trade being good. But now, because of how people react in the playoffs, as I've mentioned before, we keep bringing up Tracy McGrady and, how I think he was just an amazing player. And basically, he just got screwed by being on bad teams. This is a case of like Josh Smith getting bailed out by being on a good team, because the reality is that was a bad move by Daryl Morey. I still stand behind what I said then. After watching how Josh Smith played then, including in the playoffs, I still say it was a bad move. And, he gets one game that pays off, and suddenly Josh Smith apparently is worth the money. And I really hate when I have to put up with narratives online trumping, stats, etc. So that makes me sad. But that said, this really, in my opinion, does put the Warriors in the position of, if they don't win this season, and I really hate to say this because I just went on my tangent about how I hate how playoffs define people, but with how the Warriors are now, with the competition, right? The Clippers and Spurs were both eliminated for them. They don't have to play either of those teams. The East is a mess. We're going to go to them next. If the Warriors don't win with how good they played this season, if they don't win a title, it will be the most disappointing performance out of an all-time great team. And I hate to be the one saying that, but I'm actually on your side, Internet, for that. So anything to wrap up on the Clippers, Brian? I know I see you getting all the links ready for the next segment, but figured I'd ask.
Oh, yeah. I'm distracting with all this production you can see now in the background. But, no, I mean, I can say it was a great series, and those were two pretty similar teams, with big stars, questionable defense at times, questionable benches at times, and, yeah, a lot of big comebacks, a lot of point swings, a lot of blowouts in that series, too. Really entertaining, weird series. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is if you're the Clippers, Steve Ballmer, you've got a core that is young, complimentary, and amazing. Like this reminds me of the '08 Celtics, except without the issue of having KG being old and Paul Pierce being old and Rondo. Like Rondo versus Chris Paul, right? They're not comparable. Chris Paul, I think everybody wants to play with. Rondo, even though he's a great passer, a great defender, I think he rubs a lot of other players the wrong way. You really just need to get rid of Doc Rivers. He's terrible. You need to get rid of anybody named Rivers on that team. You need to get rid of. Trade Redick and Haas for whatever you can get for them, and just get decent players around that core, and you will be an amazing team going forward. But without that, you're gonna, this is the new OKC Thunder, right? This is the new team with an amazing core of players that's going to underperform because of bad management, and that I hope that's not the case, right? It makes me kind of sad.
As a biased Warriors fan, I hope that is the case, that they hold on to Doc Rivers and Austin Rivers for many years to come.
They let DeAndre Jordan go.
Yep. Although Warriors, to the East, not to Dallas. I don't want that. I was
going to say, what if the Bucks? Actually, I really like Andrew Bogut. What if the Warriors? I said Bucks. I meant Warriors there. What if the Warriors trade David Lee for DeAndre Jordan? Like, there you go.
Yeah, the Twin Towers with Bogut. That'd be a great lineup.
Or
I like your thinking, Dre.
Bogut. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so next series I want to talk is the Cavaliers versus the Bulls, and oh my goodness, this is. So here's some background story. My wife and I went out to dinner that night, and it was playing at the bar, and so I got to watch a lot of the game. And I actually really ticked off my wife because as I was watching the game, I kept saying, "Now that's some ugly ball." And my wife would go, "Well, what was ugly about it?" And I'd go, "Well, he took a bad shot." And she'd go, "Well, what's wrong with that?" And I'd go, "It's ugly ball. It's bar conversation. You're just supposed to say yep," and we keep watching the game. So anyway, we're watching the Bulls versus the Cavs, and that game was just horrible. Like at one point, there's a play where the Cavaliers just turn the ball, or I think the Bulls just turn the ball over. So the Cavs are running the other way, and the Cavs player tries to throw the ball back for the follow-up player to get the alley-oop or whatever, and he misses the player and throws it out of bounds. So it was a turnover followed by a bad pass, and it's just ugly ball. And if you look at Derrick Rose and LeBron James, were two players who arguably should have, LeBron James should have had the MVP. Derrick Rose won it. Derrick Rose shouldn't have been the MVP, but at least was in MVP consideration in the mainstream's eye. If you watched how those two players played in the series, it was horrendously ugly, right? Pau Gasol and Kevin Love both missed games to injury. Kevin Love's not coming back. This was an ugly, ugly series. And good on LeBron James for making what is fifth, sixth, however many consecutive conference finals he's now making as a player, which is ludicrous. And we'll talk more about LeBron James and his all-time status. But this was just not a good series. And then I'm actually going to tie these two together. The other series I want to talk is the Hawks actually making it to the finals. I was listening to an old show, Brian, that we did, and I actually said, I don't care about the Eastern Conference. Tell me when until it's the Cavs versus the Hawks. Until then, who cares? I'm going to even renege on that. I don't care about the East. The East has some horrible teams playing. Like the Hawks that made it to the finals are not the Hawks that went on that hot streak at the beginning of the season. I think you made some comments about Kyle Korver's shooting. I'm trying to see if I can get these up in front of me real quick. I had all the playoff stats, and I can't find the Hawks versus Wizards. But anyway, Kyle Korver in the playoffs, in this series, shot 43.8% true shooting. This was a guy that was shooting close to 70% true shooting at one point. Wow. Like if you don't have Kyle Korver playing the amazing Kyle Korver during the regular season, you don't have the Hawks that you had. And this is against the Wizards, and the Wizards, were not a good team this year. That's what I should really stress is John Wall is amazing. John Wall, along with Russell Westbrook, had to have those, and Klay Thompson had to have a stupid season where players that I'm normally hard on actually played quite well, and I had to go, yeah, all this hate I gave John Wall, he actually played like a top point guard in the league. But outside of John Wall, the Wizards, not Warriors, were horrendous. They were a 46-win team in the East. That is not a good team, and this team almost took the Hawks to 7. That's something else to keep in mind is that if you look, the Hawks won this series in 6 games, but the last 2 games, game 5 and game 6, were by a combined 4-point win margin. So when you compare that to the Warriors blowing out the Grizzlies versus the Hawks squeaking by the Wizards, they're not close. And then when you compare the beaten up Cavaliers taking on the beaten up Bulls and almost taking it to 7 games, the East is, it's just, it was already weaker. Then it got beat up. All the stars in it got beat up and aren't playing like they were playing earlier. It's a horrible, horrible conference. And
Oh, is Dre still with? There we go. Okay, you're back, Dre. You're back. We got most of that.
What was the last thing you heard me say?
It was just a brief pause. You were finishing up on how bad the East is.
Yeah, if the West team doesn't win the finals, then this will have been the worst finals. I can just call it ahead of time. This will have been the worst finals we've ever seen because it will have to require 2 teams playing horribly. And I hope that doesn't happen. I really hope it's a Warriors 4-game stomp of the Cavaliers. The Hawks don't deserve it with Korver not playing like a star. So if the Warriors just decimate LeBron James and the Cavaliers, I'd be fine with that. Kind of reminiscent of when the Spurs took down the Cavaliers with LeBron James. A repeat of that. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I agree, and I think you got at the biggest thing earlier a few seconds ago, which is the Warriors are looking like the healthiest team in the playoffs right now by far. David Lee's
really funny, by the way.
It's that's what they were worried about, right? Bogut, Curry, these guys get hurt, but not right now. Lee's a little dinged up. Mo Spates is out right now, but that's actually good for the team. They don't want him getting any minutes. So, yeah, that's a big advantage for the Warriors. Not only did they have the best roster when healthy, they actually are the healthy team.
Yeah, that is a funny thing. Okay, and by the way, this is a random tangent, sort of related to the playoffs, but not really. So, as I mentioned, my wife and I went out to eat. We had Mexican food while we were watching LeBron James and the Cavs beat the. It was a bad game. Like I said, my wife got sick of me for saying that's some ugly ball, and I said, I told her, I was like, I'm gonna keep saying it until they stop playing ugly ball, and I think I said it like 15 times in the span of half an hour. By the way, I don't know why my wife puts up with me, but I love her. She's amazing, and she puts up with this stuff for me. So who knows why? But last note, we were at a Mexican restaurant. I think Brian.
Is this what the El Jarapeo link is for?
Exactly.
Okay,
So
I'm bringing it up right now.
this gets like a pseudo shout out. This show brought to you by. Now, here's my complaint. I live in Wisconsin, and there are some Mexican restaurants. They're okay, but none of them serve sopapillas for dessert. This is unacceptable if you are a Mexican restaurant. At El Jaripeo, thank goodness they had a fantastic sopapilla for dessert. It was great. It was giant. It had chocolate and strawberry sauce on it. It was delicious. I didn't even eat honey, which I know sounds blasphemous in terms of sopapillas, but it was freaking delicious. So with that said, got to give them a shout out. Now, one note, I'm not a huge alcohol drinker. I'll do it on occasion. But what I will say is their drinks did feel a little watered down. So if you're going for the dessert, El Jaripeo is great. If you're going for, the margaritas with a lot of shots, there are other restaurants you might want to consider if you're in the Wisconsin area. So anyway, that's my shout out there.
Good shout out.
All right. I don't really. Do you have anything else to say on the Wizards versus the Hawks? I mean, other than if you are the top seed in the league and you end up playing a team that's close to a 500 record, you should not be beating them by thin margins. And if this was a one-off, I mean, we've seen this happen, right? We saw the Hawks take the Celtics to 7 games, right? If the East had one or two kind of flukish series, which we expect to have in the playoffs, fine. But when every single Eastern series is an, in theory, good team struggling to beat an, in theory, mediocre team, that's when you just know it's a trash conference, it's trash playoffs.
I would be that heavy-handed. Okay, I'll temper this a little bit by saying that I do remember the games. Again, I'm in the Warriors' shoes right now, right? You asked me earlier, who do I fear right now? Well, I do fear the Hawks to some extent. They're not playing well right now, certainly, like you said. But early in the year, they were playing a lot better. And the first game, they won against the Warriors, and it was a great game, very well played by both teams on offense and defense. So if that old Hawks from earlier in the year come back, maybe, but you're right, we haven't seen them for a while.
Yeah, and I'm not worried about it. I mean, I hate to say it, but even if they do, they weren't as good as the Warriors with how the Warriors are playing now. I mean, okay, so I got some of the playoff stats out in front of me, and so here's like the rough part. If you look at the 4 factors, the Dean Oliver 4 factors for each of the series, and you check out the shooting between the Cavaliers and the Bulls, which was 48.9% effective field goal percentage. That's factoring in threes. And then 44.3% effective field goal percentage from the Bulls. So that series was horrible in shooting at each other. You want an effective field goal percentage around 500 to be even decent, and these teams nowhere close. The Hawks versus the Wizards, 47.7% effective field goal percent against 46.5. Again, horrible effective field goal percentage. Now, I want you to compare that to the Golden State Warriors against the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies being, in theory, a really good defensive team. The Golden State Warriors, 54.2% effective field goal percentage against the Grizzlies. And then the Houston Rockets versus the Clippers. This is kind of sad for the Clippers. It was 50.5% effective field goal versus 52.1 effective field goal. So, I mean, essentially, out west, you have these good teams playing each other, and they're still shooting relatively well. Out east, you have these bad teams playing each other, and they're shooting horribly. I don't see how you can't be heavy-handed after
so I will pile onto that one, though. I agree with you there. Oh, man, this is so funny. I'm just laughing about it. No, the Warriors lost those 2 games to Memphis, and those were basically their 2 worst offensive games of the whole year. And that's why people started getting worried around here. They said, well, maybe Memphis can shut them down. But, of course, small sample size. The point is, though, none of these remaining teams, I don't think, can be the defensive team that the Grizzlies were. So if the Grizzlies, despite those 2 great games on defense, only held them to 52%, yeah, it's really tough to see someone like the Rockets doing it.
So, by the way, for all the Warriors fans that love the show, here's what I'm going to give you. In Game 1, the Warriors beat Memphis. Again, a 50-plus win team out west by 15 points. In Game 4, they beat them by 17. I hope I'm getting my math right. I got my math wrong, Brian. I apologize. 17 points. Game 5, 20 points. Game 6, their worst margin of victory win, 13 points. So if you recall, when we were talking about this team as just the overall season, they had a point differential basically of 10, which is amazing. And you watch them, the 4 games they took down the Grizzlies, they took them back. Their worst win was 13 points. Holy cow. Now, the 2 games that Memphis, actually fought their damnedest to win. They won by 7 points and 10 points, respectively. So this team kept it close in their losses, blew out the team in their wins, and took down a great team. And so that's why, like, the Warriors, I watch them, I'm like, this is yours. Like, you just beat the crap out of the Grizzlies. There is no reason the finals with you not playing the Clippers or the Spurs. And I don't care. You playing the Cavs without LeBron, or you playing the Hawks. I'm not even going to say anything else. This playoffs is got to be yours, and that's what I'm saying. The Warriors versus, and even the Rockets, right? The Rockets put a drag out fest against one of the best teams in the league. So fine, I'll give them a close series, but I will not give you a close series against, the Wizards. I will not give you a close series against the Bulls without Pau Gasol for part of the series. I just can't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other thing about Memphis is they oh shit, I lost my point. Move on, Dre. Move on. I'm doing too many things at once. Move on.
You're a Warriors fan. You're like, the other thing about the
Warriors
I know. Is we beat them. They're beaten. Okay, so now basically to me, the Eastern Conference is like a Mexican restaurant without sopapillas and watered down, alcohol. It's just not even worth going to. Don't even worry about it. All right, now, and the Warriors, for comparison, they're like a Mexican restaurant with sopapillas with good alcohol. So there you go. All right, so the other thing I want to kind of discuss this week that's actually basketball related is Michael Jordan versus LeBron. It was a small survey, but big enough for me to just go, these people exist. 34% of people in a survey, and I forgot I don't remember if I gave you the link, Brian, but if not, I'm sure you can look it up. But 34% of people said they think that Michael Jordan could beat LeBron James in a game of one-on-one right now. And there's one of two things here. Either these people do not understand the meaning of the word or phrase right now, which is troubling on its own, or two, they're just stupid. Because that's a ridiculous freaking thing to even think. And the other thing is, even in their primes, I don't think Michael Jordan could take down LeBron James. I think the thing that's kind of ridiculous to consider is this. If you look up the stats, Michael Jordan was listed at 6'6", and shooting guard's a little smaller. LeBron James is not right. LeBron James is, I think, 6'9", 6'10", a lot of muscle, really fast. Like, LeBron James has like 4 or 5 inches on. Yeah, I really like the people using the Hulk gif to show how stupid this is. But LeBron James just dominates Michael Jordan on size. And what's also worth considering is people will probably think that Michael Jordan was a better shooter than LeBron James, which is true to a degree. He did have really good effective field goal percentages. But if we watch LeBron James's best versus Michael Jordan's best, LeBron James put more balls through the hoop. And additionally, LeBron James had a better range, because my favorite Ethan Sherwood-Strauss article on this, and something I keep bringing up over and over and over again, the NBA shortened the three-point line for 2 years of Michael Jordan's career. And it was the only 2 years in his career he even shot halfway decent, and it was when he was older. And basically, LeBron James beat Michael Jordan on reach. He can inches and inches on Jordan in terms of size. It's huge. It is to think that Michael Jordan has one-on-one game against LeBron James. I'm sorry, that Durant, because Kevin Durant, 7 feet tall, can shoot, the most versatile shooters ever. Would destroy 3 players. I said in one-on-ones against MJ in their primes, MJ couldn't take LeBron, Durant, Curry, to name a few, and that means I think there are more. Curry might be getting greedy, but just for comparison, the amount of size Michael Jordan has on Curry is less than the size that Durant or LeBron have on Michael Jordan. And finally, we've watched Curry make Chris Paul, there's the infamous Allen Iverson crossing over Michael Jordan, which all I'll say to that is it's cool. But to be fair, Michael Jordan was quite old at that point. But we have in his prime Steph Curry crossing over Chris Paul. and we keep talking about it on the show, not Chris Paul, Steph Curry's release is just absurd. So I don't think Michael Jordan, as good of a defender as he is, with Steph Curry's reach and quickness of release, I think in a game of one-on-one, Steph Curry just gets the ball at the outbound, puts it through the hoop over and over and over again, and Michael Jordan doesn't stand a chance. And I think Curry can actually do okay enough on defense because Michael Jordan does actually have to get closer to the rim. So that's my take there. And apparently I got a lot of people upset. I had somebody, this by the way I consider poor form but hilarious. Someone blocked me on Twitter and then tweeted about how they were blocking me. If you have to tweet about how you're blocking someone, you're just blocking them to show off. You're not doing it for anything else. And thank you for thinking I'm a big enough name that bragging about blocking me even matters.
That's a great idea. I'll block you too, Dre. I need the hype.
Fair enough. Anything to say on that? Am I saying anything controversial? That's going to be our poll.
No, I have to apologize again, for the way we started the show. I just don't have any interest in one-on-one. Maybe if we could do some research, find some one-on-one leagues and, see what wins in one-on-one, I'd get more interested. But nope, don't have anything to say about it.
I always bring this back to, as I keep mentioning, the Attitude Era in wrestling. We compare stuff to wrestling all the time. But so anyway, the Attitude Era is this just kind of everybody holds this era up. And I talked a little bit about this. I forget if it was last week or 2 weeks ago. But I just get annoyed in sports when people kind of hold up certain eras of the sport as this golden era that can never be touched. And I do feel like the 1990s with Michael Jordan is that, where people just cannot believe the idea that there are players better than Michael Jordan or teams. I mean, the Bulls, those 2 years were freaking amazing. And I still stress the league had some weird quirks in it that made that possible. But essentially, I just get annoyed that fans seem to think that Michael Jordan is this untouchable player because first off, even during his time, I would argue he didn't dethrone Magic Johnson. That was the player to dethrone, the player right before him who was the greatest. Magic Johnson made it to five titles, 9 NBA finals, was just a ludicrous player that could do everything. Michael Jordan is the greatest shooting guard in the history of the NBA. As I mention all the time, I think he's a top 5, top 10 player. I don't think he dethroned Magic Johnson. And even if you think he did, there are other players you could look historically, Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, that, still have arguments. So the fact that Michael Jordan kind of got to the top of this, this heap that everybody points as like, you can't touch Michael Jordan. I don't think he was there to begin with. And I think people just romanticize this era of basketball as if to say, well, there's no way Steph Curry could take him in a game of one-on-one. There's no way LeBron James will ever be considered as good. And even the players, they're like, Kobe Bryant's kind of like the next Michael Jordan. Like all of these comparisons to Michael Jordan just drive me crazy, make me kind of sad. And like I said, it's like the Attitude Era in wrestling where I think it was Dean Ambrose, a few other wrestlers have come out and said, for as good as the Attitude Era was, there was a lot of bad stuff about it that people just seem to forget. And I feel Michael Jordan's the same way. For as good as he was, people just overinflate how great he was, unfortunately. And that's history and nostalgia to people.
Yeah, and let's go even farther, even more high level. What you're talking about now is sort of this debate of there's always got to be the hero ball, great wing player, one-on-one player, right? That's the context of this conversation. But let's be honest, like we've got Olajuwon, David Robinson, Ewing. They're all playing during this time. They're all big men, so they're like, well, big men just can't be the best player for some reason. But these are also all players that are more effective than Jordan, according to the numbers.
I mean, Jordan at his best was really, really freaking good. And part of what made Jordan so really good is the fact that he was a shooting guard that way outperformed what we had normally seen at that position. Because I mean, right. I would even argue like Clyde Drexler, you could put him as a small forward. Jordan, well, you could say he was a guard forward. That was really because of the triangle, right? Like Jordan is a shooting guard. He's a guard. Like he wouldn't really be a wing player except with Phil Jackson. That's what he has to play. But you could argue that Clyde Drexler, Oscar Robertson, these are wings, is what you could argue. So Michael Jordan took the shooting guard position. Was one of the few players in the history. I'd argue like Michael Jordan and I'm trying to think of Manu Ginobili and James Harden. There've got to be a few others. I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. But
Wade, maybe? He had really good numbers for a long
Dwayne
time.
Wade, definitely. Thank you. Apologies, Dwayne Wade.
Whenever I think of Ginobili, I always think of Wade just because they're contemporaries. So
exactly. So it's hard to think of too many players that I would argue really took that position and ran with the shooting guard position. And, that's just the thing is Michael Jordan did do that, and there's a lot to be said for that. But I think it's hard to necessarily, just because he did that, I don't think, it's kind of like in baseball, just because a catcher is really good at hitting, and let's say hypothetically
Yeah.
catchers don't hit, which isn't really true. I think a lot of catchers have a lot of power. This metaphor has fallen off horribly. But the point being, just because there's a player that's a really good hitter that's traditionally not a good hitter for that position, does not mean that that player is better than better hitters. And that's kind of where I put Michael Jordan. And to
Exactly.
be fair, Michael Jordan is in a level of eliteness that few touch. And I've said this before, I consider it squabbling. Like,
Yes.
when you're going to argue Michael Jordan versus Kobe Bryant, if you take Kobe Bryant, you're so wrong. You're so wrong. Please just don't talk to me. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. Like, that sounds really mean, but it's like self-screening. Like, I'm like, someone comes up like, I think Kobe Bryant's the best. I'm like, I never want to talk to you again about basketball. We're good. What are your thoughts on Game of Thrones? Let's talk something else. But if you want to talk to me, Elijah Wan versus David Robinson, or Kevin Garnett versus Ben Wallace, or or a more popular one would be like Kevin Garnett versus Tim Duncan. I don't really care. Even if I have numbers that concretely say David Robinson was better than Hakeem in the regular season, or that, I think KG was better than Tim Duncan in their primes, even if I have those, I see both sides of that argument. And Michael Jordan's there. He's in that, what's the Mount Rushmore of greats. I have no problem with that. I don't think that he's untouchable. I think, like I said, I think he's on a Mount Rushmore. I don't think he's the Lincoln Monument. Is there a good statuesque monument for?
That's a
for
good
basketball?
analogy.
I guess I don't know. All right.
Well, as you know, Justin Halpern, who was on our show, tweeted last week to tie baseball catchers in with Game of Thrones. Jon Snow does have the Mike Piazza hair going right now, that's for sure. But back to your other point about Jordan, Ginobili and Wade, even the reason why they were so great is because they are sort of like point guards in a way. They would do a great job passing also and not turn it over as much. So, even then, it's kind of a little different.
All right, so yeah, you're keeping me going on this. So, like, if you look in baseball, one of the things about Moneyball, one of the things in a lot of research was basically things like stolen bases, sacrifice bunts, sacrifice flies, things like these that people considered a big part of the game were actually bad because it's underrating the value of an out, right? An out
Yep.
is really, really valuable in baseball. So if you're going to steal a base, better be really good at it, because if you don't, the risk reward for it's like a 78% or something, like almost 80% effectiveness is what you have to have at stealing a base to make it worth the loss of an out versus the benefit of advancing a runner. So that kind of stuff. And but I know there's all sorts of corner cases, ninth inning, whatever. We're going to leave those out. But I think that the problem with the shooting guard position traditionally in the NBA, and I think Ari Caroline's written about this, is it's a position that really encourages a lot of bad habits that don't help win. And it's almost like you had a position that said your goal is to bunt, is like to sacrifice bunt, and if you get on base, to steal bases. And you go, these are two horrible strategies. Why would you have a position to do that? And I think that's why when we see these shooting guards that actually can shoot well and pass well and play defense, that's why they elevate it so much. But I think a big problem with the shooting guard position just as a whole, and it's still in the NBA, hopefully this gets us on to our next topic.
Great segue, Dre. I agree.
Yeah, it's just that teams kind of play it wrong. So that's kind of where I'm at with shooting guards, basically.
Yeah, no, I'm ready for the position adjustments. You just started on it.
All right, so one of the things we don't like to do a bunch of on the show is like behind the scenes. We like this to be kind of a standalone show. So hopefully you got all of the fill you wanted on NBA talk. We're going to end that, and we're going to go to shout-outs. So if you're done listening about the playoffs, we're done with that. Just keeping you in the loop on the Boxscore Geeks site itself. One of the things we do is we use the points over par metric, which is the best publicly available metric so far. Unfortunately, all the other ones have major flaws. We can't get behind things like win shares. Don't even bring up per. When you bring up RAPM or defensive RAPM or wins above replacement or VORP, all these other things these other sites are doing, I love y'all, but I'm sorry. They all have just such glaring flaws. And if there is a flaw that you find in the points over par metric, and we've discussed some of the things we would love to improve, some of the things we can't answer with the metric, I feel that is a very important thing when you talk metrics, is what it can and can't say. And there are times where you just can't use the metric to say something. If there is any problem you have with the metric, just be aware that it is magnified like 100-fold on all those other metrics. So that said, one of the important pieces is a position adjustment. So we look at a player's contribution according to the box score in terms of how they help their team win, and points over par, basically what what kind of point margin it would help the team win by. So if a player has a points over par of 3, it's saying all things equal, if they played on an average team against an average team, you would expect that team to win by 3 on average. For comparison, 3 is like star level. If you start getting up near 10, that's Golden State Warriors level, which should tell you why the Warriors are so freaking amazing this season. So anyway, with that said, when we get into the points over par metric, something important is we do a position comparison. So we compare point guards to point guards, shooting guards to shooting guards, etc. Now, this season, there's been some issues basically with essentially small ball teams, but actually doing it right. I would look at a player like Draymond Green as an example, where he is a power forward that can basically play like a small forward, and he rolls out at both. And you have teams. So when we look at the listed position at sites like Yahoo or NBA.com or Basketball Reference, we kind of have an issue with how we're comparing players to players. That's something we've needed to fix, and something we want to correct on that actually is we want to simplify things, because a lot of people bring up, well, what about small ball? What about tweeners? And we agree. In our minds, there are essentially 3 important distinctions in basketball. There's the point guard. This is one position that the NBA as a whole has kind of given a set of responsibilities to that makes it its own position, because they have a player whose job it is to pass. So you can't just compare guards to guards, because point guards always have higher just have higher performance on average because they're expected to pass the ball. So we basically have point guards, we have wings, these are shooting guards and small forwards, and then you have bigs. These are power forwards and centers, players that play close to the rim. And so one of the things we've been looking at doing is basically fixing our position adjustment to simplify it, because that answers a lot of questions. It is really annoying to compare someone as a shooting guard versus a small forward, or even a power forward versus a small forward, because there are these small distinctions that in some cases can cause, I don't want to say major. In a lot of cases, it's not a major difference in performance, but something people kind of get mad at is when we list the top 20 players. Well, if Dirk Nowitzki is ranked 15th below 3 other players, and someone says, well, I think he should be ranked a little higher, you may be right. So one of the things we've been looking at is simplifying that so that the position adjustment isn't as granular, but still takes into account the basics we know about basketball, which is one player's job it is to pass. You have a couple players whose job it is to hang out on the perimeter, and you have a couple players whose job it is to get close to the hoop. And we've also been looking at just correcting how we allocate minutes and stuff. Basketball Reference does start doing stuff like that. 82 games has it. It's something we've been meaning to do. We haven't yet. We apologize for it. So that's where we're at there. I know there have been some comment discussions about it. So basically, this is a case where we say we agree, we're sorry, something you can expect in the near future. Keep bugging us if you don't see it. And then just this is also a nice plug for a tool. We actually do have something called the player comparison engine. At the very top where it says tools on the Boxscore Geeks site, you can easily compare 2 players next to each other. And if you want to, you can just select, you can compare Kevin Love to Dwayne Wade if you want to see what Kevin Love's numbers look like as compared to, say, a shooting guard, because one of the things we'll do, and Brian is bringing this up perfect, is when you bring up Kevin Love versus Dwayne Wade, we'll bring up the average position. And so you can actually see that Kevin Love compared to an average shooting guard is a much better rebounder, but we'd only expect a shooting guard to get 5.4 rebounds. Kevin Love gets 13.9, but that's compared to an average power forward who'd get 11.6. We put this on a per 48-minute basis. That's if they played the whole game. So mess around with that tool. Be aware that some improvements are coming. Hopefully that alleviates it. Don't worry, we'll leave you a post the second it happens, so you will know. So if those of us in the comments saying, is it fixed yet? We'll let you know when it's fixed. All right. So anyway, that's all I got there. Unless you've got anything else to add to that, Brian, I can take us into shout-outs.
Just real quickly, the 2 things I'm excited about that, again, are coming up, I don't know exactly when, that are the beta features for the site. One is the actual, points over par box scores. Those do kind of exist on the site and maybe will be public in the future. Patrick's talked about it a little bit, but like you said, we've been all busy. You guys have. I don't do any programming. I don't try to take credit. I just push buttons. So that's really great. I want to be able to do shows where we actually talk about actual box scores more, since we are the box score geeks. Also,
yeah, I would have liked. I would have liked to, if we'd had some time, and time is a factor. But I would have liked to have talked looked at 3 Josh Smith box scores with some slightly. I mean, I love the box score. I can look at them all day, but I'd actually like to get some graphics to say here's what we're seeing, because that's one hard thing about the box score. I had a moment with Jeremy Britton where I was showing him an OLS table, which is an ordinary least squares table for regressions that economists use a lot. And I was so excited, and I showed Jeremy Britton this table, and he was just like, it was like I showed him something in Russian. He was like, what am I? Why does this matter? I'm like, don't you see? There's a star here at the 5%. At the 5% level, which means it's statistically significant. It's this variable and it's this standard deviation, and it's hard to understand it. And I find the box score can be the same way, where someone just goes, "Well, Melo scored 20, isn't that good?" And you go, "No, you got to look at the field goal miss. You got to look at that column. You got to look at turnovers. You just,
Yeah, someday we'll have a box score where those, like you said, Dean Oliver's 4 factors are very obvious to anyone looking, and I'd love to share that with the viewers a little bit more.
Basketball Reference does have those, but even that, I mean, I think there's a lot that can be done with the box score to make it more appealing, and we should get on it. And then I don't actually feel bad as this is an excuse, because it is like, yeah, both myself and Patrick end up getting busy, so that means it's very feast or famine for you fans, and thank you for putting up with that.
And the other thing, of course, is the kind of the running chronological wins produced for each player that's plotted on a graph. Again, you'll have to see it to like it, but it's pretty cool stuff, and yeah, sometime in the next few months it'll probably be out there.
You're killing us with the few months, but we should actually have.
I don't want to put put the screws to you, Dre.
You should actually, because we were talking about this. So we do a weekly show. That's one thing. By the way, just be aware that we do this show. I do this show for fun. This is actually a hobby to me. And so when you've heard me sometimes on the show say things I don't want to do, it's because I don't want this to be too much like a job. Because if it turns into a second job, I just won't do it. So when you're like, well, why are you doing an hour podcast every week instead of fixing it? He's like, well, that's a job. I'm a coder. That would be just doing what I would do, in a normal work day. I don't want to come home and do that, but I would love to come and talk to my friends about sports, at the end of a work day. So, but anyway, I do like, we were talking about having this weekly, because if we don't have it weekly, it kind of falls apart. We've even noticed it's really nice to have 2 hosts, myself and Patrick, because we both have times where we just can't make it. And luckily, we haven't had any of the complete fall aparts where all 3 of us can't make it, except I think for when Wisconsin was in the Final Four. But, it's one of those where having a deadline, having something, it actually makes you work towards it. Because if you're doing something for fun and you have no deadline or no commitments, I find a lot of times those just fall away. So I like you keeping us honest, Brian.
Got to crack the whip.
All right, so I'm ready to go into shout-outs. I've got 2, and one of them's kind of a cheat code. I'm actually going to leave this to you, dear fans. So basically, I'm going to say, if it doesn't happen, it's not my fault. If it does happen, thank you, fans. So I tweeted out the live link about the show going up, Brian, which you give us, and on days when we go at the correct time and we remember, we tweet it out, and you can watch us live. Fantastic. I said, Boxscore Geeks show is going live at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Tune in. Dave Barry asked, who's the guest? Now, obviously, we've had, Jonathan Weiler and Paul Shirley and Justin Halpern recently, so I could see we're not quite to the point where we're a guest a week, especially since that involves scheduling and time commitments and all that jazz. But anyway, so here's a point many people will notice is Dave Barry has not yet been a guest on the Boxscore Geeks show. So, and I've asked him a few times, he is as busy as all of us are, but Dave Barry is apparently worried about who guests are on the show. He hasn't been a guest on the show. If you really want Dave Barry, you fans, tweet at Wages of Wins and say, I would like to see you on the Boxscore Geeks show. We will accommodate that. I will record any time that's available for Dave to be on the show. Let him know you'd like him on. That's a really mean shout out, but it's saying Dave Barry's wondering about guests. Dave Barry hasn't been a guest. Fans, make it happen. All right. My other shout out is to Harlabab on Twitter, Vulgaris, who, we talked about a little last week, where I said, we talked with Justin Halpern, and he's he was a regular on the now defunct Short Corner podcast. And if there is someone who, he may disagree with me about DeAndre Jordan, and that's fine. But if there is someone who understands my Doc Rivers hate accurately, it's him. And so basically, first off, anytime you do a Twitter picture with a picture of a dog, you just automatically win. So Bob Vulgaris, he has a picture of his dog looking at 2 big monitors, watching Doc Rivers, and it's just hilarious. It was one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite tweets, and he says he runs the numbers, isn't impressed. Coltrane for Clips GM in 2016. Dog over Doc. Love it. Love that you made that happen, Bob. And then the next one is Vulgaris tweeted out, Doc really has no bad of a GM he is, and that blows my mind. And you mentioned this to me pre-show, Brian, the USA Today piece where Doc Rivers has a quote where he said, when he came to the Clippers, he was like, what are we going to do with this roster? No, you had Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, and DeAndre Jordan. you were given a cheat code. The fact that you didn't make at least the conference finals this year is just a testament to how bad you are as a GM. Seriously, Steve Ballmer, if you want to be a winner, if you want this to be a Windows in the 90s instead of Linux in the 90s, got to get rid of Doc.
Yeah, and I don't have enough time to bring it up, unfortunately, but the top most liked, man, I'm not getting my Reddit terminology right, but on RNBA was that link, and the first post was something to the effect of, and his answer was bringing in his son to the bad roster.
Oh my God, just Austin Rivers. If Austin Rivers is back next season, I just have no faith for that team. Like, I mean, we gave the Warriors. I apologize to jump back a little on this, but like we gave the Warriors some crap about being run well, and Jeremy Britton notoriously wrote the after Myers was hired had some
That's right,
points on that.
Executive of the year, Bob Myers, by the way.
Oh, well, that's fair. But basically what we can kind of point at when we look at the Warriors is the Warriors seem to me like a team that would have a good first idea, and if the first idea failed, their backup plan was horrible. Because there was a point where they were targeting like Dwight Howard and Andre Iguodala, and then Dwight Howard and Andre Iguodala, Iguodala went to the Nuggets and Dwight Howard went to the Rockets, and then they were like Kwame Brown, and you're like, that was your backup plan. You're like, your first plan was amazing, that was your backup plan. But now when they seem to be running, I have a lot of faith in that team going forward, which is to say, as long as nothing really gets knocked off the rails, this team seems to have a good idea of what it's doing. So as a Warriors fan, you just have to say, please, please don't have 3 players get injured. Please, 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 don't have a couple things go wrong, because they're in a great spot, especially salary-wise going forward with the players they have. Now, the Clippers, though, it's just this one where it's like they don't seem to have a plan, and even having those great players. So it's kind of like comparing those two, like having a plan, knowing what you're doing, versus not having a plan but being lucky with good players. That's where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, the Clippers had to bring in all these players to cover for all the injuries this year, and they just didn't work out. Compare that to the Rockets, who brought in Prigioni, who played great in that series. There's probably a couple other guys I think they brought in from free agency. They were playing well too, despite the Tarek Black mistake. So
yeah, it's
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. We talked with Justin Halpern. I don't think any team is really that amazing. I think there's some teams that are much better than other teams. I think the Rockets on a curve are better, but I don't think that's kind of where I stand. I don't think that the Rockets
absolutely
are a greatly run analytics team. Sorry, but I do think if we look at the curve of NBA teams, you're a great run analytics team, if that makes any sense.
I think the commenter who always posts this is Papukar. I could have that wrong, but
and we messed up.
Maybe Dodgson. I don't know. One of you guys that posts all the time likes to say, "Look, here's this list of 5 to 10 guys you can get for nothing that would just instantly give you a 40 to 45 win team in the West." And yeah, the Clippers just aren't able to come across any of those guys, even stumble across them. So yeah, it sucks for them. And just to go back to your point about the Warriors, I felt the same way in previous years, and you can see on a lot of the fan sites. The fans will be, the past when the team was irrelevant for 20 years, all those sites were doing is basically, NBA trade machine links. What trades are we going to do? And we'd argue about all the trades, right? That's how it would go. Well, now they're about to win a title, and you'll even have fans saying, well, let's not ruin the chemistry. Let's not break up the team. Let's just keep whatever we have, right? And see, that's dangerous.
There is... In professional sports, I will actually say, so this is something interesting. You're going to see this, right? The Warriors if the Warriors win a title versus the Warriors not winning a title, and by the way, the odds are just dropping on that not being the case. But let's say the Warriors win the title. They're probably not going to muck with their roster, but you can imagine, and this happened with the Bulls when they signed Rip Hamilton, a winning team that doesn't make it as far as they expect to starts mucking with their rosters and getting rid of sometimes role players. Like I don't recall if it was Stavros Cephalosha, but they'll get rid of role players that were really useful, and we got to change something up. We got to get a shooter to compete with this team. We got to get a big to compete with Shaq. We got to get an X to compete with whatever, right? And to me, that's always just kind of amusing to notice that slight change. And I will say it is usually the case in professional basketball that doing nothing with a decent team often trumps doing something with a decent team with how most GMs handle it, unless it's for a star. Now, obviously, for a star, that's completely different.
Well, yeah, that was the end of my point about the Warriors is that, yeah, sure, that's a reasonable perspective for the fans to have. But when I hear rumors like they're going to be going hard after Kevin Durant in the offseason, that makes me happy that they're willing to keep upgrading the roster no matter how good they think the team is right now. Now to your last point, though, what matters is are those actually good moves or not, right? They have to be willing to make moves and know how to make good moves. So that's the real question. Are they that kind of a team now? And it's clear that the Clippers under Doc Rivers probably aren't. They just have these 3 stars they've been riding.
Oh, I have no faith. I have no faith in the Clippers. I have no faith in the Clippers. I mean, the one piece of credit I gave them, and I don't know how much I can give them, because the other thing is understand that the CBA. By the way, wow, we took shout-outs long, but I noticed we were right at about an hour, so we didn't go too long.
Perfect timing.
The CBA gives you such a huge advantage on keeping players. So the one advantage I could say under Doc Rivers' tenure is he kept Chris Paul. Right, that's huge. Keep in Chris Paul, but understand that Chris Paul would have to hate the Clippers to want to leave them, and I don't think they were better alternatives for Chris Paul. I don't think they were going to, as long as they offered Chris Paul the max, which they did, I don't think they had any problem. I don't think they were in any fear of losing Chris Paul. Even if he had started getting dicey and saying he was going to weigh his options, I think that they were just going to keep him. So that to me is kind of the interesting aspect, where it's just like the only good thing you can really say about Doc Rivers is he kept Chris Paul, and I don't know how much credit to honestly give him for that.
Yeah, of course, the rumors are right now, again, rumors, who knows what's actually happening here, but it's that Paul wants Jordan to leave, but Jordan is Rivers' guy, so who knows what that means for that love triangle. I don't know.
If Chris Paul wants to get rid of DeAndre Jordan, he deserves everything he gets if he doesn't win anything ever in his career. Like, if that happens,
seriously,
by the way, I will jump off. I will jump off of Team Chris Paul. And so, by the way, I'm a huge Michael Jordan historical aficionado, and that's something worth saying about Michael Jordan is that if the GMs on the teams Michael Jordan was on that did amazing had listened to Michael Jordan would be considered a good player that fought a couple of good, like he would be Tracy McGrady is the honest truth, because he didn't want Scottie Pippen. Him and Scottie Pippen were really mean to it's Tony Kukoc, I think is how you say the end.
Yeah.
You know, they were really mean to that. Like Michael Jordan was a horrible GM. We saw this when he started taking control of teams. So if Chris Paul pulls a Michael Jordan and they actually listen to him, then I'll just basically be like, you know what? It really sucked when you were in New Orleans and you couldn't win anything because your front offices were terrible. But if you got rid of DeAndre Jordan, I have no sympathy for you for the rest of your career. You don't deserve a title.
Yeah, well, and this is what we always say about coaching, right? Is Paul is mad at Jordan for not doing what he says, basically. He's not practicing free throws enough for something. But, you know, doing what you're told is not how you should be measured as a player. Your production should measure it.
Which is, yeah, that's one thing. If we have Paul Shirley on again, I'd love to talk to him about, because one thing, it's almost like Bull Durham, if you've seen the movie, where Crash Davis just really hates, what's his, Crash Davis, how am I forgetting, Nuke
LaLoosh.
Thank you, Nuke LaLoosh. Nuke LaLoosh, he doesn't really like his character, and it's this guy is so stupid. And it's funny, I've heard a lot of people talk about this. I actually heard it was in a Nerdist podcast with Kumail Nanjiani, where they were talking about people that don't think. And in this case, they were saying about being good lovers. I've heard it being good surgeons, good basketball players. It has got to be so maddeningly frustrating to be a professional athlete, to work really hard, and to be next to someone who basically their skill is not overthinking things, but that makes them seem like an idiot. And so I can see that as another player getting mad, saying you're not cerebral enough as a player. But sometimes just not overthinking things and just doing what you're supposed to is what makes
it. It's the forest and the trees, Dre.
I guess. All right, so do you have any shout-outs to end the show with? And I actually have one after you're done. So.
No, let's go right into yours.
Oh, so you don't have any? All right.
Nah.
Just like person. All right, so the last one, I emailed Patrick to make sure that's okay. So the last shout-out, congratulations to our own Patrick Minton, who got engaged this week to his lovely fiancée, Karen, who I got to meet, actually, when I went out to Sloan a few years ago. I got to see Patrick do karaoke. Karen actually came out too. She got to see me do karaoke and talk to Patrick about stats. She still likes him, so there you go. They are a wonderful couple. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of Patrick here. And it's also just a funny thing. Apparently, the rule of the Geeks is you got to marry a Karen. So Brian, if you're on the market, look for someone named Karen.
Sounds like a good plan.
All right. Well, that's what I got. If you don't have any shout outs, Brian, I will take us into our outro.
Now let's do it.
All right. If you happen to find this show not through our site, you can find us on boxscoregeeks.com. Also, it really helps us if you like the show, subscribe to the show. We are both on iTunes and Stitcher as The Boxscore Geeks Show. We do a live video show every week, which you can find on Channel Nerd Numbers. We have a playlist there for that. So if you subscribe to that, you will get alerted as to when the live show is going live. And we usually do that every Monday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, unless we have to schedule around guests. All right. With that said, we will see you next week.